At 3:14 in the morning, three men followed Solange home from the biker garage. At 3:17, they were gone. One knife lay open in the gutter, catching rainwater under the streetlight, and the 32-year-old Korean Mafia boss was the reason no one came back for it. Jae Hwan stood outside her apartment door with blood on his knuckles, asking his older wife for one night. Not her bed, not her body, not forgiveness. Just one night by the door, close enough to hear if danger came back, and far enough to remember he no longer had the right to touch her. Solange opened the door and looked at his hands first. He had washed them, but not well enough. Then she looked at his face, powerful enough to make half of Seoul lower its voice, guilty enough to stand before a 55-year-old woman in biker leather and wait for permission to breathe. "You brought violence to my door again," she said. "I stopped it before it reached you." Her eyes stayed cold. "You still think the difference matters?" He lowered his gaze. "One night," he said, "by the door. That's all." Solange watched him long enough to make him feel every inch of the space between them. Then she said the first rule. "Don't touch me." He nodded once. She stepped aside, but not enough to welcome him, only enough to let him in. "You protect the door," she said, "but not me." Jae Hwan entered only after Solange moved aside. He stopped just inside the apartment, waiting for her to decide where his body was allowed to exist. The lock clicked behind him, soft and final. Her home smelled like rain, leather, antiseptic, and motorcycle oil. A black helmet sat on the counter. Her riding jacket hung over a chair. The life she had built without him was everywhere. "Chair," she said. Not the couch, not the kitchen table. A wooden chair near the wall, close enough to the door to remind him why he had been allowed inside. He sat without asking why. Solange crossed the room slowly, one hand brushing the edge of the counter as her injured side tightened. It was small, almost nothing, but Jae Hwan saw it, and his body moved before his pride could stop it. One step. Solange did not turn around. "Chair." He stopped, then went back and sat down. That was the first real rule of the night. Not a sentence, not a threat, a correction. Inside her apartment, he waited before he moved. She removed her jacket herself, slower than she wanted to, and laid it over the back of another chair. Tattoos moved across her shoulder with the motion. He looked away before memory could make him greedy. Solange noticed that, too. "If I say stay, you stay there," she said. "If I say leave, you leave." He nodded. "You do not help me unless I ask." "I understand." "No," she said, crossing to the kitchen. "You are learning." She placed a glass of water on the small table beside him. Not in his hand, beside him. A mercy with a border around it. Then she walked toward the bedroom and left the door half open. Not as an invitation, as a warning. He was inside her home now, but not inside her life. And sometime before sunrise, he would learn how hard that difference could become. The apartment did not stay quiet for long. Jae Hwan sat on the wooden chair near the wall, close enough to see the half-open bedroom door, and far enough to understand that the distance was deliberate. His coat was still damp, and he kept both hands on his knees where Solange could see them. Inside the bedroom, a drawer opened. Something glass touched wood. Then the bed shifted. He did not move. Then her breathing changed. It was small at first, a shallow catch in the dark. Then another, sharper this time, controlled, but not controlled enough. Jae Hwan stood before he thought. The chair legs scraped the floor. From the bedroom, her voice cut through the room. "Don't come closer." He stopped with one hand already lifted. The doorway was 10 steps away. For a man who had made armed men disappear before sunrise, 10 steps should have been nothing. But Solange had turned them into a wall. He lowered his hand. "I heard you," he said. "I know what you heard." Her voice was tight. Pain made it thinner, but not weaker. "There's water beside me," she said. "Medicine on the dresser." He looked toward the room, then back at the floor. "Do you want me to call someone?" "No." "Do you want the medicine closer?" Silence. Then, finally, "Put it on the table by the door, not beside the bed." He moved only after the permission was clear. Slowly, he stepped into the bedroom doorway, never crossing farther than she had allowed. He picked up the small bottle from the dresser with 2 fingers and placed it on the table near the door. Then he stepped back. Exactly back. Solange sat against the pillows, one arm pressed against her side, silver-streaked hair loose across her shoulder. For one brutal second, he remembered when pain in her face would have brought him to her without question. Now, it brought him to the edge of a line, and no farther. She watched him return to the chair. She did not thank him. She did not soften. But she also did not tell him to leave. Jae Hwan sat down again, hands on his knees, breath locked behind his teeth. For the first time that night, Solange closed her eyes while he was still in the room. Not trust, not yet, but not exile either. Then, on the table beside her bed, her phone lit up once. Jae Hwan saw the glow. He did not move. Not yet. The phone lit up again. This time it did not go dark. Jae Hwan kept his hands on his knees, exactly where Solange could see them, but his eyes moved before he could stop them. One name on the screen. Malik, the biker who had found her bleeding on the road when Jae Hwan did not answer. The man who had called the ambulance, stayed until the doctors took her away, and remembered which medicine she was supposed to take at night. The man who had earned the right to call. Jae Hwan's jaw tightened once. Only once. But Solange saw it. Of course she saw it. She reached for the phone slowly, her fingers still unsteady from pain, and answered without explaining a thing. "I'm awake," she said. Jae Hwan looked down. Malik's voice came through low and rough. "You take the medicine yet, Sol?" Sol. Jae Hwan felt the name like a hand closing around his throat. "Almost," Solange said. "You need me to come over?" The room changed, not loudly, not dramatically, but every inch of it felt sharper. Jae Hwan wanted to stand. He wanted to take the phone. He wanted to say no man came to his wife's apartment at 4 in the morning. But that was the old language. Ownership, pretending to be love. Solange opened her eyes and looked directly at him while she answered. "No, I'm not alone." Malik went quiet for half a second. "Is he there?" Jae Hwan stopped breathing. "Yes," Solange said. "You safe?" The question landed like a knife, because Malik had the right to ask it. Jae Hwan did not. Solange's gaze stayed on him. "I'm deciding." That should have destroyed him. Maybe it did. When she ended the call, Jae Hwan almost spoke. Almost. The question rose in his throat like poison. Who is he to you? But he swallowed it. Solange placed the phone back on the table. You want to ask, she said. He said nothing. You want to know why he calls me at night? Why I answer? Why his voice does not make me flinch? His fingers curled once, then opened. Even he knew the question. What right did he have to be jealous? Solange answered before he could. You don't get to hate the man who came when you wouldn't. Jae Hwan lowered his eyes. I know. No, Solange said. You're learning. The word should have felt like mercy. It didn't. It felt like a leash he had chosen not to break. Then Solange reached for the medicine he had placed exactly where she allowed it. She took it without asking for help. And Jae Hwan stayed seated, silent, jealous, punished. Still there. By 6:12 a.m., Seoul had Solange's name in its mouth. Her phone vibrated first, then Jae Hwan's, then both at once. Solange sat on the edge of the bed with one hand braced against her side, staring at the screen as if she already knew the wound before seeing the blade. Jae Hwan saw the headline first. 55-year-old biker wife uses one night to control young Korean Mafia boss. The room went still. Then the messages came faster. Screenshots, comments, photos from outside the biker garage, and one blurred image of Jae Hwan entering her building before dawn. Someone had taken the night she allowed him to stand at her door and turned it into a spectacle. Solange reached for her phone. Jae Hwan almost said her name, then stopped before the first syllable became a command. She opened the article herself. The words were cruel in the clean way public cruelty pretended to be reasonable. Too old for him, too damaged, too desperate. A tattooed black woman clinging to a younger Korean man through guilt. A 55-year-old wife using a lost child to keep a 32-year-old Mafia boss on his knees. Then came the comments. He begged for one night, and she turned it into a leash. He needs a wife, not a midlife charity case. He is not in love. He is paying for the dead baby. Solange's face did not change, and that frightened him more than tears would have. Her thumb paused only once on the words, too old to be wanted without pity. Jae Hwan saw the smallest break in her armor. Something old in him woke up hungry, not desire, violence. His phone was already in his hand before he remembered the chair, the door, the medicine, and every rule she had made him obey. Names moved through his mind: editors, drivers, informants, and Mira. Not as proof, as suspicion. Solange looked up before he made the call. No. You don't know what I was going to do. Yes, she said. I do. Another notification flashed across her screen. Is she his wife or his punishment? Jae Hwan's hand closed around the phone until his knuckles went pale. Then, slowly, he turned it face down. This time, not to ignore her, to obey her. The woman the world was laughing at had bled alone because he had not answered. Now strangers were using that pain to shame her for surviving him. The night had been private. The punishment had been hers to give. By morning, the world had stolen even that, and obedience was easier in silence than it was with the whole city laughing at her. The phone stayed face down for 12 seconds. Then a black sedan stopped below the window. Jae Hwan saw it through the gap in the curtains. His second-in-command, Min Seok, stepped out into the morning rain, with 2 men behind him and a tablet under his arm. He looked up once, waiting for permission from a boss who had not given an order. That was worse than another call. Jae Hwan had built men who moved before he spoke. Solange saw the car too. Jae Hwan picked up the phone. His thumb hovered over Min Seok's name, close enough to wake every violent solution he knew. Solange did not shout. She crossed the room slowly, pain tightening her mouth, and stood between him and the window. "Do not answer that if you are going to turn my name into an order." His thumb froze. "They used your child." Solange's breath caught. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for the words to find bone. "Our child," she said. The correction took the anger out of his face and left something worse underneath. "They used our child," he said, quieter now. "They used your age, your body, your grief. They put cameras outside your building. And your first instinct is still to make men afraid." He looked past her to the sedan below. Min Seok had not moved. "You want to find whoever leaked it," she said. "You want every editor afraid to print my name. You want to stand in front of Seoul and call me your wife so loudly no one can laugh at me again." He did not deny it. For a moment, the room held the shape of the man he used to be, cold, certain, and ready to call control protection. Then Solange's voice lowered. "You don't get to use my humiliation to prove your love." His hand closed around the phone, but not at her, at himself. "If I do nothing, they keep talking." "If you take over my voice," she said, "then you become another man using my pain." Jae Hwan looked at the phone again. His thumb was still close enough to choose violence. It took him too long to lower it. That was the truth. It took him too long. But finally, he placed the phone on the table and slid it across the wood toward Solange, screen down, out of his reach. "What do you want done with your name?" he asked. Not easily, not peacefully, but correctly. Solange looked at the phone between them. "For once," she said, "wait until I decide." Outside, Min Seok remained in the rain, waiting for a command that did not come. Then a new message appeared on Solange's screen. From a number saved only as Hospital Liaison. The message from Hospital Liaison held one file, a voice note from Mira. Solange did not play it right away. The thumb hovered over the screen, and for the first time that morning, Jae Hwan saw hesitation touch her hand before it reached her face. She got into the hospital records, she said. Solange looked at the file name. Room 914, Fetal Loss Report. A detail the article had not named, a detail only the hospital, Solange, and Jae Hwan should have known. Then she pressed play. Mira's voice filled the room, soft enough to sound intimate, and cruel enough to feel surgical. "Solange," Mira said, "you always were good at surviving in ways that made men feel guilty." Jae Hwan knew the voice instantly. His hand moved toward the phone. Solange's eyes cut to him. "No!" He stopped, Not because he was calm, because she was not finished bleeding. Mira continued.
The article was easy. People already wanted to laugh at you. A 55-year-old black woman in biker leather pretending a 32-year-old Korean mafia boss still wants her for anything except shame.
Solange's mouth stayed still, but her fingers tightened around the phone. She did not stop the recording. That was her choice. Mira heard the weakness she had never been in the room to see, and pressed exactly there.
He can mourn beside you, Solange. That doesn't mean he still burns for you.
Solange's eyes dropped for half a second. Jae Hwan saw it, and hated that Mira had found a place he could not defend with blood. Then Mira's voice came again, simpler and meaner.
Guilt can sit beside you all night, Solange. Desire does not.
Jae Hwan's face changed. Solange saw it, and that made the line cut deeper. Mira's voice lowered.
Today he wants to defend you, but one day he'll want a woman the world doesn't laugh at.
Solange's breathing shifted. Not enough to call it breaking, enough to prove the knife had found skin. Then came the final cut.
He only stays because you lost his child.
Solange's hand moved to her side before she could stop it. Not to comfort the wound, but to cover the place where memory still lived. Jae Hwan almost spoke. He wanted to say no. He wanted to swear it. He wanted to drag Mira's name through blood until the whole city learned silence. But that answer would have been too fast, too desperate, too much about saving himself from the truth of the question. Mira was still speaking.
If you want proof, let him defend you today. Let him stand in front of cameras and call you his wife. Then ask yourself which part he is protecting. Your heart,
another, or his guilt. The recording ended. For a moment, no one moved. Solange lowered the phone slowly. Her voice was almost steady. Almost.
What if she's right?
Jae Hwan looked at her. The answer he wanted to give would have been too easy, so he did not give it. Solange looked from him to the phone between them, and something changed in her eyes. Not forgiveness, not surrender. Decision. If you speak today, she said, you will not speak for me. Solange stood before Jae Hwan could answer. Too fast. Pain almost took her back down, and for 1 second her hand pressed hard against her side. She swallowed the sound before it could become something he would try to rescue. Then she made herself stand.
If you speak today, she said again, you speak about what you did, not about what I am to you.
Jae Hwan rose slowly, not toward her, but because the sentence demanded he meet it standing. The old answer was already in his mouth. Mine, my wife, my woman, my mistake. He swallowed all of it. Solange did not step back.
You do not say she is mine.
His jaw tightened.
You do not use my wife like a weapon.
He lowered his eyes.
You do not promise revenge. You do not make Mira the center of my pain. You do not turn my body, my age, or what we lost into proof that you love me.
Outside, Min Suk still waited in the rain, with men trained to obey the old Jae Hwan. Inside, the new one had to wait for a woman's terms.
What do I say? He asked.
Solange looked at the phone, then at the half-open bedroom door, then at the chair where he had spent the night learning not to cross lines.
You tell them the truth.
His voice was quiet.
Which truth? That you were the man who did not answer.
The words struck him clean. No cruelty, no performance, just consequence. And if they ask what I am to you? Solange's face did not soften.
You tell them that is not their question to ask.
For the first time since the article broke, Jae Hwan looked only at her. Then he nodded, not as a husband, as a man receiving permission with limits. Solange picked up the phone and handed it back to him, not because she trusted him fully, because now he knew the price of speaking wrong.
Go, she said, and if you make me smaller out there, don't come back to this door.
The cameras were already waiting downstairs, not inside Solange's apartment, not at her door. Jae Hwan had made sure of that before he stepped outside, because the first thing he could still protect was the space she had not given him permission to expose. Min Seok opened the black umbrella over him, but Jae Hwan took it from his hand. No one goes upstairs, he said. Clear the cameras from her building, but don't touch anyone. Min Seok looked at him once, confused by the restraint.
Yes, sir.
Reporters crowded near the entrance, phones raised, microphones waiting for blood. They expected the old Jae Hwan, the man who could end careers with one sentence and call a woman his wife like a warning. For 1 second, he almost gave them that man. The words came easily. My wife. Mine. Say her name again and disappear. Upstairs, Solange watched the live feed with the phone in her hand. She saw his mouth open, saw the old shape of the words almost form, and her thumb hovered over the screen, as if she could close the door through it. Then Jae Hwan stopped. He swallowed every possessive word like poison. When he faced the cameras, his voice was lower than usual, less polished, more dangerous because it was honest. The woman in that article does not belong to me, he said. The reporter shifted. Jae Hwan kept going. Her name is Solange. She is not a scandal. She is not a punishment. She is not a desperate woman holding a younger man through guilt. A camera flash cut across his face. She is the woman I failed. The crowd reacted at once. A murmur moved through the reporters, and another phone pushed closer, hungry for the confession. Jae Hwan did not look away. I was the man who did not answer, he said. 31 calls. I saw her name. I turned the phone face down. If the city wants a headline, use that. Upstairs, Solange's thumb stopped moving. For 1 second, she did not breathe. Not because the truth healed anything, because he had finally put the shame where it belonged. A reporter shouted over the others, Is she still your wife? Jae Hwan's jaw tightened. There it was, the trap. If he said yes, he claimed her. If he said no, he abandoned her in public. Solange's rule held him by the throat. That is not your question to ask, he said. Another reporter pushed forward. Then what are you to her? Jae Hwan looked toward the upper windows, not knowing if she was watching, but feeling the weight of the door behind him. I am the man who lost the right to stand beside her, he said. And if she never gives that right back, that will be consequence. The phones kept recording. He took one breath. You can talk about her age, her body, her tattoos, her grief. You can laugh because a 55-year-old black woman survived a man younger, richer, and more dangerous than her. His voice lowered. But understand this. If there is shame in this story, it starts with me. Someone asked about Mira. Jae Hwan's hand closed at his side. Min Seok saw it. So did Solange on the screen. Old violence rose fast, clean, familiar. For 1 second, his silence looked like a threat waiting to be born. Then he opened his hand. I will not make another woman the center of Solange's pain, he said. And I will not use revenge to pretend I have changed. That answer cost him. Everyone watching could see it. If I speak today, I speak only about what I did. I ignored her. I failed her. I let the world believe my power meant protection, while the woman who needed me most was alone in the rain. His voice broke once, only once, not enough to ask for pity, enough to prove the sentence had teeth. So do not ask whether she is mine. He looked directly into the nearest camera. She is not mine to claim. She is hers to choose. The reporters went quiet in a way that felt less like respect and more like shock. A final voice cut through. Do you expect her to forgive you? Jae Hwan almost laughed. No warmth, no hope. No, he said. I expect to live with whatever distance she gives me. He stepped back before anyone could turn his confession into performance. Min Seok moved closer, waiting for another order. Jae Hwan handed him the umbrella. Clear them out, he said. No threats, no blood, no names. If anyone touches her door, they answer to me through the law first. Min Seok hesitated. And if the law does nothing? Jae Hwan looked up towards Solange's window. Then he remembered her final condition. If you make me smaller out there, don't come back to this door. Then we still do not make this about my anger, he said. Upstairs, Solange lowered the phone. Her hand moved toward the lock before she stopped herself. That was the part she hated most, that she was still deciding. Downstairs, Jae Hwan turned away from the cameras and walked back toward the building entrance. For the first time in years, he approached Solange's door without power, without threat, and without knowing whether it would open. He came back to the door without knowing whether she would open it. No guards followed him. No cameras reached the hallway. No blood marked his hands this time. Jae Hwan stood outside Solange's apartment with nothing left to use except the one thing he had always been worst at: waiting. Inside, Solange sat on the edge of the bed with the live feed closed on her phone. She had watched every second. She had seen the almost slip. She had seen him swallow mine before it became a claim. She had heard him say the shame began with him. It mattered. That was the problem. It mattered more than she wanted it to, because wanting his change to be real did not make the wound smaller. Her hand moved to her side again, not because of pain this time, but because Mira's words were still there. Guilt can sit beside you all night, Solange. Desire does not. Jae Hwan did not knock like a husband. He knocked once, softly, then stepped back from the door. That small distance nearly broke her, because the old Jae Hwan would have filled the hallway with his need. This one left space for her answer. Her hand hovered over the lock before she stood. That was the part she hated most, that she was still deciding. Solange crossed the room and opened the door. He was waiting exactly where a man without rights should wait. Not too close, not looking past her, not asking to come in. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Solange said, "You did not call me yours." "No." "You did not make Mira the center of my pain." "No." "You told them about the calls." His throat moved. "Yes." Her eyes searched his face, and for the first time that night, he did not try to survive the looking. He let her see the damage. He let her see the wanting. He let her see that wanting her still did not mean he deserved her. "You finally protected me without trying to own me," she said. The words hit him harder than praise should have. Then she finished them. "That is not forgiveness." "I know." "And it is not permission." His eyes lowered. "And it does not mean you get to touch me because you told the truth in public." "I know." Solange's breath trembled once, barely enough to hear. "But it is the first thing you've done that didn't make me feel smaller." Jae Hwan closed his eyes only for a second. When he opened them, she was still there. The door was still open, not wide, not enough for him to enter, but not closed. Behind her, the chair near the wall waited in the dark. Solange looked at it, then back at him. "One more night," she said. "Same chair, same rule." His voice broke quietly. "Nothing else?" She held his gaze. "Not closer, not forgiven, not claimed." Jae Hwan nodded. He accepted it like a sentence he had asked for. Not as a husband, not as a mafia boss. As a man learning that access was not won by power, tears, or public confession. It was granted. In inches. And only by the woman he had almost lost forever. He crossed the threshold, but not the line. The door closed behind him. This time, it did not sound like ownership. It sounded like a boundary being kept. The door was open, but the distance remained. And if you were Solange, would you open the door wider, or leave him exactly where he finally learned to wait?